Are you ready for a new experience? To see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You are tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. Just a reminder, you can follow us both on Instagram and Facebook. Just look for Viewpoint with Father John. Also, if you miss a show, go to YouTube, and in the search bar, just put Viewpoint with Father John, KCAA, and you'll be able to get all of the last 3.5 years of shows. And I'm on Twitter. That's right, at Father John Reed. R-E-I-D is the correct spelling. Anything less would be uncivilized, nor would it be Irish. So be sure you spell it correctly and smile when you say that. So come see me on Twitter. It's always an amazing trip. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing a false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And folks, I'd like to tell you about a great place in Claremont called Claremont Pharmacy. This is where I get all my pharmaceutical supplies. Dr. Nikki Ho is the proprietor there. And if you want some good service at a pharmacy, this is the place to go. And they do have vaccines available, both the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson, and that's at no cost to you. So if you haven't been vaccinated, please go get vaccinated. It's not just good for you, it's good for everybody around you as well. Also, are you in town and need some sound? Then go to the Lakeside DJ Services, which is Lakeside DJservices.com, which is ran by our very own Frank, who is our sound engineer. And he not only does the sound, he has a photo booth as well. So come get your picture taken, get your focus on, as we say. And he'll do a great job for you. Anyone who follows this show, you know that Frank always does a great job. So be sure to get part of that. Also, I want to tell you about Justice Matters. That's my friend Glenn Kirshner. Now, this is not a paid advertisement. I share about Glenn Kirshner because he's the real deal. He was a federal prosecutor for 30 years, and he served 6.5 years in the United States Army as a JAG attorney, a prosecutor for them. And if you want to get real information, not slanted one way or another, apolitical information on the legal situations taking place right now, go to Justice Matters on YouTube. You'll really be glad you did, because it's really good stuff. And with all this stuff, it's hard to find what's real and what's not real. It's nice to have a source that you can listen to and say, you know, he's giving me straight information. And Glenn's a personal friend of mine, and he has integrity that's incredible. Tonight, I have a dear friend with me this evening. You know him very well, Dr. John Smith. He is a psychotherapist, a professor, and author of the book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. And we were talking earlier this week about what should we talk about, you know, that we haven't covered a whole lot. And so we came up with the idea of crisis time is awakening time. And where we're going with that is during COVID, and coming almost out of COVID, but not quite, because I'm sorry, some people don't want to get vaccinated, so you're taking us backwards. Go get vaccinated, for heaven's sake. We want to get rid of some masks here. But a lot of relationships have taken hits because of COVID. Now, you may say, well, why is that? And it's because people are spending so much time at home with so many new stressors, whether it's financial, whether it's health, whether it's grief because you have someone that you love who died, a member of the family, extended family, mutual friend. And so many relationships have taken serious hits because of this. But crisis time is awakening time, where we find new answers for old situations. And so we want to talk a little bit about that and finding some of these things and letting you know you're not alone in this, There are a lot of people having this. So, Dr. Smith, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Glad-
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. John Smith is my official fill-in host when I have to be out of town. He's the guy I hand the reins over to, and he always does a fabulous job. So thank you for being here. I always enjoy
Thank
having
you. I always enjoy being here and being part of the show.
So what do you think of this idea of crisis time is awakening time? Does that have
Well,
any meaning for you? Or?
it actually does. In when I teach what we call crisis intervention, which is a skill of how to help de-escalate and intervene with people in crisis, one of the things that we teach is that the Chinese symbol for crisis actually has two meanings. One is danger and the other is opportunity. So it fits well with the theme because when we're in a crisis, it presents us, of course, with danger. There are things that, not always life and death, but it definitely means that there is danger that something unpleasant, something bad could happen. But then crisis is also a time of opportunity, a time for growth, a time to look at new opportunities, to change, to grow. Mm-hmm. Both of those can be painful.
Yes.
Growth, even if it's positive, also can be a painful experience. And so a lot of people kind of like to stay stuck and stay in their routine because they think they're avoiding the pain.
Well, we go through that when we're in our adolescent stage. We have the growing pains that we go through physically. We want to be taller, but we don't want to feel the pain that takes place of getting taller with our bones increasing and muscles increasing. But it's a necessary growth unless we just, want to stay that size our entire life, which some people do.
Right.
But,
well, and I think in my experience, the thing that is probably most problematic for most people that ultimately causes the most emotional turmoil, the most problems, is when people stay stuck.
Right.
Right. So a lot of times people stay stuck because they are afraid of change. They're afraid of what might happen next. They're afraid of the unknown.
Yep.
Okay. They're unhappy, but they also are afraid.
Well, I think part of it, some of the experience I've had is what may be painful is familiar.
Yeah.
And while I don't like the pain, at least I know how to operate in this pain, where if I go outside this pain, how do I know there's going to be anything better than what I already have?
That's true. That's true. And that's, there may be some truth to that. But if what you have isn't working, and if you've made efforts to improve it, to fix it, to change it, and that's not working, then ultimately you're not going to be satisfied or happy if you stay with something that isn't working. So sometimes you just have to take a leap off the deep end, a leap of faith, if you will, that something better is to come, but you can't, it's like I can't swim to something new if I'm holding on to the other side of the pool.
Right. Well, it reminds me of a story I heard years ago about a guy, and supposedly it's a true story. The guy who told me said it was a true story. About this guy had more money than sense, and he made all the arrangements that when he died, he was going to be in the back of his Bentley, sitting up. They're going to bury the car and he wanted the light turned on inside, and somehow they did it so that they were able to get past the EPA and everything. And so when he died, they did this thing, and he's sitting, upright in the back seat of Bentley, and they're lowering the car into the grave. And one guy at the gravesite says, "Man, that's living." Is it? He's dead.
Yeah.
And we can be in that in an experience, but because we think we look good, and we won't look as good, we get buried inside the Bentley.
Depending, we were talking about going through change, especially if it's change in relationships, is stressful. It's painful. There's grief and loss. There's sometimes there's anger. There's hurt. There's guilt.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of emotions that are flying around, and so sometimes it's that the turmoil and the pain makes us just sort of want to shy away from it, to run away from it, to get away from it, and that's not really facing it and dealing with it head on, which ultimately is the thing to do. And I can speak from personal experience that that's definitely what you need to do, even though part of you is saying, no, don't do that, don't do that.
Well, part of fear, I think, is being afraid of never being loved. And when you're in a situation where you're not feeling loved now, which I think is the worst type of loneliness there is to be next to someone you're supposed to be in love with and being absolutely alone. But facts and feelings are two different worlds. I've talked about that many times. So the feelings say, but at least I know this person. If I leave this, I'll be totally alone, and there's no guarantee that anyone will ever love me. Well, when you're in a loveless relationship already, it may be familiar, but sort of like phantom pains after you have an amputation. You it feels like it's still there, but it's not there.
Well, again, something I've learned the hard way is if you don't love yourself, and you don't have a good relationship with yourself, and you depend on others to feed you those things that you're not able to provide yourself, then you always become sort of dependent on something outside yourself to fill what you perceive to be missing from within.
Yes.
I write about that in my Authentic Man book about I call it the theory of halves.
Right.
If I'm a half a person, then I look outside myself to fulfill what I perceive to be missing inside. But then that's where addictions and dependent type behaviors occur, because now I'm reliant upon somebody or something to provide me with something that I perceive that is missing within me, that is probably already there, but I'm too afraid to look at it.
And part of that's cultural. I see it a little bit like this, that in the way we approach things in the American culture, I'm not trying to put us down, it's just an observation, is that when we're born, the doctor cuts the umbilical cord, and instead of letting it go, we grab the umbilical cord and we start trying to plug it into people, saying, okay, you're going to make me feel secure, you're going to make me feel financially okay, you're going to make me feel loved. And it's not the right fit. You have to let the umbilical cord go so that you can get life where life exists, not where it used to be.
Yeah, but that's too scary.
It is scary. It's terrifying.
I might actually have to look in a mirror and look at myself. I might actually have to spend some time alone. I might actually have to, go inside myself and see what's in there. And that's scary stuff.
And takes some risks.
Yeah, it is, it's, I get that sometimes it's easier said than done. That is, for many people, myself included, that's a really hard thing to do. It takes a lot of courage to take a look at yourself and to look at what's inside. But yet, imagine if you were to have a relationship with yourself like the one you wish you had with somebody else.
Right. Exactly.
Then you're going to be a more whole and complete person, and then the person that you really want to be with is going to be more likely to come along because your energy will match theirs, and you'll be able to find somebody more like the one that you were hoping to have in the first place.
I think that's an important point, and when we come back from commercial, I want to talk more about this. The fact that if we don't know what we want in the first place, it's hard to bring that in. So we'll talk a little bit more about attraction in relationship. You're listening to Viewpoint with Father John on NBC Radio, KCAA, and my guest this evening is Dr. John Smith. We'll be back in 90 seconds.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Smog Test Center in Baldwin Park reminds listeners that our law enforcement personnel are instrumental in preserving our nation's founding principles of liberty, justice, and the rule of law. They encourage our community to reject any assault on the men and women of law enforcement. Let's keep the blue in the red, white, and blue. That message of community support and strength is from Smog Test Center in Baldwin Park, where they are on the air, saluting all of our men and women in uniform.
It's okay if you're wondering.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen anywhere around this beautiful world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And Frank, how you doing in there? You're now you're sporting a new car and everything. You know, we're paying you too much. I think you need to tip the host. He hit the wrong button.
Rule number 1 of sound engineering is never press the wrong button.
That's right.
You
That's
just
right.
broke the rule, man.
Just watch whose buttons you're pushing.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on a new car, and
Thank you.
so you can carry all that equipment for DJ
Lakeside.
Lakeside DJ services.
Yeah.
DJing out of a subcompact hatchback is not as easy as out of an SUV. So,
Nor what someone's ex used to do, which was curbside. Anyhow,
Yeah.
when we went to commercial break, Dr. Smith and I were talking a little bit about, attracting people into our lives. And I had mentioned to him during the break, we have places like Match.com and other places like that, where we are looking for something, we don't know what we're looking for. And if things inside us don't change, well, it's just the same soup in a different bowl, but each time the soup gets a little colder.
Yeah.
And it gets a little more difficult to digest. And so why don't we talk a little bit about broken pickers?
Yeah, I love that term. I think that many times we are clearer on what we don't want than what we do want.
Mm.
And I often tell people that as human beings, we're sort of, I think we're raised on all these fairy tales and Disney movies where everybody lives happily ever after, and true love will overcome everything. So we're always looking for that. So we were looking for that emotional hit.
Right.
But the problem is that, and that's our picker, and our picker is basically formed and wired when we're children to, like it or not, to our parents. So if we have strong parents, really good relationships with our parents, then we're likely to develop a healthy picker, and that's going to attract us to healthy people.
Yes.
And if we have unhealthy or broken relationships with the parent, then we're going to be attracted often to the parent we have the problem with because we're trying to fix that relationship. It's an unconscious process. It's not like we put it down and say, okay, we're going to do it. But that's just the problem. If we keep picking the same kind of person and we're not satisfied, we're not happy, we keep, getting in these relationships with, people that are not healthy for us,
Yeah.
then the picker's broken.
Well, I
What
know.
that means, though, is that we can correct that, and I got a process for that I'll talk about, but it's important that we understand that we can't rely on and trust the old way of doing it, which is that emotional hit.
Well, yeah, I look at my case where so many of the relationships I'd had until that was worked on and had some change, I recognized people who were emotionally unavailable and who needed rescuing, and I'm a rescuer. And until I got in touch with that, nothing could change. And,
Right.
And you've probably heard me say this a million times that, until we learn our lesson from the experience, we must re-experience the lesson. But when history repeats itself, the price goes up.
Yes.
And it's that kind of thing because we attract what we recognize, as you were saying, and there's been scientific studies, and forgive me, I should cite the source, but it's slipping right now. But there have been some studies that have shown that we can be in the Coliseum out in LA with 50,000 people there. Our antenna will go up, the other person's antenna will go up, and in that crowd of 50,000 people, we'll find each other.
Yep.
We'll connect.
Yep.
And so you have a way of working with the law of attraction in that. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk a little bit about that.
All right. So the process that I teach, and I say I teach it. We teach what we most need to learn. So I have to apply it to myself. I'm just going to be honest. But the process is that because the picker is an unconscious process. We're not. Even when we do work on it, it still operates often outside of our awareness. So we put more conscious thought into buying a car, right, Frank? Or getting a television set or buying some new thing. We put more conscious thought into that than we do in picking our partners.
Yes.
Right? So how do we pick our partner and sort of take our broken picker out of the equation? Doesn't mean that you can't have the emotional connection, but you can't use that to make your decisions. You gotta. It's hard because you're going to go, oh, well, that just doesn't. That takes all the fun out of it. Well, if you keep getting the same kind of person and the same unhappy, unhealthy relationship, then maybe you ought to think about that, right? So here's the. It's easy. Everybody this is an easy process. You get out a sheet of paper, you fold it into 3 columns. Okay, the first column is called must-haves.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the must-haves are those things that are necessary and required that you can't live without. You're not going to be happy without it. Now you might go, well, I'm just being too picky. Well, yeah, a Ford's a great car, but if you must have a Mercedes, then you're never going to be satisfied with a Ford, even though it's a decent car. It's not what you want. So the must-haves is, maybe there's 1 or 2, maybe there's 10 or 15 things on your must-have list. And yes, it may be hard to find somebody who has those must-haves, but just remember that you're not going to be satisfied without them. So
Right.
You can't, if you settle for less, and many people do, or many people settle for the bargain basement version, thinking that, oh, well, I see the potential for them to become this thing, and they never do.
Right.
So you got to go with, okay, they've got it or they don't. So must-haves are non-negotiable. Okay. We're going to jump to the third column, which are deal breakers.
Right.
Okay. So must-haves must be there, but if there are any deal breakers, even if they have the must-haves, then you got to call it off. Now, unfortunately, deal breakers don't always show up on the first date.
Right.
So sometimes deal breakers come a little later, and you go, okay, well, I've already dove in here, and I thought they were perfect because they had all my must-haves. Well, yeah, but then you got to realize, okay, there's a deal breaker, and I've got to honor myself in saying, I said that if they had any of these deal breaker qualities, that was it.
Right.
Okay, that's the pledge you've made to yourself. All right, so must-haves, deal breakers, and then the middle column, that's the fun one. That's called optional equipment.
All right.
Okay. These are the items that are negotiable. Got to be great if they look like Brad Pitt, but as long as they, take a shower and they smell good, then, that's okay. Right? Boy, it'd be great if they were a bazillionaire, but, as long as they got a job and a steady paycheck coming in, I can accept that. So these are items that are nice but not necessary. And so These are negotiable items that should have no bearing on must-haves and should have no bearing on deal breakers. So again, you come up with your list, keep it handy. I would suggest that you also give that list to a trusted friend or someone that you really value their opinion, they've got your best interest at heart, and tell them, if I don't honor this list, then they have the right to, pull your covers on that and show you, hey, wait a minute, you said this, 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 and this, and this. Now, you might not listen to them, but at least you give them permission to hold you accountable to your list.
So you don't post this on Match.com.
I don't think that's a good idea because, and here's the reason why. While you might go, well, I'm just going to put it all out there, okay, which is, I get that, but there are a lot of predators out there.
Yes.
So the predators will see what you want, and then they'll be a chameleon, they'll pretend to be that, and so you'll go, oh, he's perfect or she's perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go along for a few months, you invest a lot of time, energy, whatever, and then all of a sudden the mask comes off and you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I got at all.
Yeah, and along those lines, you know, getting a fixer-upper is okay with a house,
No, it's
but not with a relationship. And the idea is, what I'm saying is, if you're going into a relationship with the idea that you're going to change somebody and turn them into who you want, then that's a recipe for failure.
Right.
Because we can't change other people, and we can become miserable with them. But change is always an inside job. And
Right.
I can only change me. I can't change you. You know, my friend, Father Tom Weston, talks about with the serenity prayer, God, grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the three things I can't change is I can't change the past, I can't change the truth, and I can't change you.
Okay, that's good. I like that.
And I think that's important going into a relationship, because sometimes people go into a relationship with the idea, if I just love them enough.
Right.
And we see this in a lot of people go into relationships with people with addiction problems. So if I
Right.
just love them enough, they'll stop drinking or using or whatever it is,
Right.
gambling. And that's why I'm saying it's not okay doing the fixer-upper thing going into a relationship, because you wind up hating each other.
Right. Right. Well, and you know, what was Shakespeare's famous saying, "To thine own self be true," right? So that's sometimes that's really hard to do, especially if we're those kind of people who, like you described. I know I'm one of them. We like to help others, and we sometimes pick those people that we think that can use our help, not necessarily all bad, but then also we have to realize, wait, we want equals. We want people who can provide us with certain things just like we can provide them with certain things. So what you're really looking for is a balance of power.
Well, and it's hard to be true to yourself if you don't know who you are in the first place.
That's so true, yeah.
And quite often with people who grew up in homes of addiction or rage or other things like that, being a chameleon was the way of surviving. So when you spend your life as a chameleon, how do you find out who you really are, what your real colors are? Because you're always adapting to situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one area where deep psychotherapy is so important, because it helps us discover who that true person is. Now that we know who we are, at least as close as we can get to that, we're in a better position to attract.
Exactly.
That-
And I want to make a point here that, you know, when you talk about psychotherapy, I know we've mentioned it on the show before, you know, the person that we're talking about that could use some psychotherapy is not mentally ill. They're not
Right.
crazy. They're not disturbed. They're someone who can't develop insight into something that they're not aware of because it's so deeply held in their subconscious or unconscious mind that they sometimes need facilitation to be able to come into contact with that stuff
Right.
and bring it up. That has nothing to do with somebody being crazy or mentally ill. It just means I need facilitation.
Well, crazy people never question their sanity.
That's true.
You know, if you're questioning your sanity, that's a good sign that you probably have some good mental health going. You have a basis to start with, because, you know, normal drinkers don't question their drinking. Only alcoholics question their drinking. But with mentally ill people, only mentally ill people don't question their own mentally ill.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. So, you know, it's I think the thing is, if you are asking yourself, why do I keep picking the same person, or why do I keep getting the same results with my relationships? Then you go, well, it must be me. Something's wrong with me. Well, not necessarily. What might be wrong is that your picker is broken.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's all. I mean, it's not like there's some deep psychological problem. It just means, hey, my picker was broken. You probably, when you realize that, you probably go, okay, I know where it's broken. I keep picking people like my dad, or I keep picking people like my mom, or I keep, there's someone or something that is from early on in my life that caused my picker to go off and formulate around that person or their characteristics.
Right.
And somehow unconsciously, that's the kind of person I keep being attracted to, or that's attracted to me.
Right. And again, that goes to the subconscious thing about, we don't attract alike, we don't attract opposite, we attract what we think we deserve subconsciously. And as you said earlier, not consciously, because consciously we say, no, thank you. Subconsciously. And, just to take a moment, the difference between repression and suppression. Suppression, we push things back in our memory, and we know we're doing it. Repression is we're doing that and we're not even aware of it. And a lot of these things happen from our repression that get us into a lot of trouble. And so it's one of those things where, with the help of a good therapist, we can bring up some of those things to find out, well, what have I been repressing that may not be in my best interest?
Right.
And we do it out of trying to survive.
Yes, exactly.
So we're not bad for doing it.
No. And again, most of the time, we're not even probably aware that we're doing it.
Right, the repression. Yeah.
Because if it's repressed, it's unconscious. It's blocked out of our awareness, right?
Right.
And so we don't know something that we don't know because we aren't even aware that it's there. That's the whole purpose of repression. Whatever causes that, in terms of how our mind operates, whatever causes that, it's kind of like a circuit breaker. Something happens and it causes that circuit breaker to go pop. And once that happens, then it's put into a file cabinet and we don't even know that it's there most of the time.
And along those lines, one of the reasons we need that circuit breaker is so that only that one breaker goes off and the whole system doesn't get burned up. Mm-hmm. It's a safety mechanism.
Exactly.
And sometimes we hate ourselves for our own safety mechanisms instead of realizing we're just trying to survive.
It really is a survival. I mean, every species of animal has the survival instinct.
Yes.
And they all do this. Imagine, you watch the Discovery Channel and you see the lion jumping on the back of the antelope, and you see the antelope struggle and struggle and struggle, and then all of a sudden the antelope just surrenders. Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's when the circuit breaker goes pop and says, this is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. I'll just make sure you're not here to be aware of it. And so it blocks it all out,
Yeah, it does. Well, speaking of circuit breakers, we're coming up to our next commercial break.
Already.
And Frank's looking at me through the glass like, get on it. And so you're listening to Viewpoint with Father John on NBC Radio, KCAA. And my guest is Dr. John Smith. We'll be back in 90 seconds.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org, www.4pfp as in personal funeral planning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Smog Test Center in Baldwin Park reminds listeners that our law enforcement personnel are instrumental in preserving our nation's founding.
It's okay if you're wondering, is the COVID-19 vaccine safe for people like me? And when you're ready, here's your answer. It was tested by adult volunteers of different ages, races, genders, ethnicities, and health conditions. Tens of thousands of people, a group as diverse as California itself. And thanks to them, we know the vaccine is safe. Let's get you there. Let's get to immunity. Learn more at vaccinateall58.com or call 833-422-4255. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed, and my guest this evening is the one and only Dr. John Smith, who is a psychotherapist, a professor over at Mount SAC, a very famous place. And he's authored the book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. And you also have another thing coming up with Katie.
Yes, thank you.
Wanna talk about that?
Yes, Katie
Katie's not a girl.
No, Katie, CAADE, that's the California Association for Alcohol and Drug Educators, and it's their annual conference. Katie is an organization that educates and supports programs that train addiction counselors. It's also authorized by the state to certify addiction counselors. It's kind of like a licensing process for addiction counselors. So they are having their annual conference on August 20th and 21st. This year it's going to be virtual. And I was asked to be one of the main speakers this year, so I'm all excited about that. If anybody's interested in that particular, attending that particular conference, that is, you go to CAADE.org and look under conference, and you'll get all of that information. Actually, if you're interested in this field or you're interested in learning up-to-date information in this particular area, it's a great place to go get that information. So highly recommend it, and yours truly will be one of the featured speakers. So,
There you go.
hey,
Remember, cookies are for closers.
that's right.
That's Frank Silver in the sound booth eating a cookie.
Yeah.
So it's we're getting him his
We gotta
weekly
get his
sugar high.
We got to get his blood sugar up here a little
That's
bit.
right. That's right. So, is there hope in all this? Because, I mean, we see what's going on. We see some of our features that we have, some of our problems that we do. Is there hope that we can change and bring into our life a healthier relationship?
Well, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, there's hope. And there's hope sometimes. Okay, so, you go to the grocery store and you buy a carton of milk.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere on that carton of milk is stamped a date. They call it an expiration date.
Yes.
And you know that your relationship with that carton of milk is going to end on or about that date. And if you keep the milk past that date, what happens to the milk?
We go to a farmer for counseling.
Yeah, well, it turns sour, right?
Right.
Now, once the milk turns sour, is it going to go back to being fresh?
No.
Right. So, unfortunately, relationships don't come stamped with an expiration date, but they all end. Did you know that? Some last a short time and we wish they had lasted longer. Some last a long time and we wish they had been shorter. And some last a lifetime, but eventually they
Somebody
all end.
dies, yeah.
Right. So, but the problem is we don't know when that's going to happen.
Right.
And we're sort of, again, trained from early on that it's forever.
That's
right?
true. That's
And
true.
we don't go into relationships with the idea in mind, hey, it's going to end, right? So we don't know when we don't know when the milk's going to turn sour or if it's going to turn sour.
Yeah.
So, but we don't expect that when we go into it. But of course, as we see and experience very often is at some point in the course of a relationship, very often the milk turns sour. Now, most people will go, well, is there hope? Can I turn the milk back from sour to fresh? When people will try, sometimes they'll stay years in a relationship trying to get the sour milk to turn fresh again, and unfortunately, once it turns sour, rarely is it ever going to be drinkable again.
Right.
That's
right.
I hate to say that, because people go, well, what about hope? I know Gary and Francine, they had problems and they got theirs. If you catch it before it turns,
right,
and fix it, yeah. If it's already turned sour, then there's a pretty darn good chance that it's past the expiration date, and you gotta accept it. But people are going to probably go, well, that's not right. That's not true. But in my experience, working with many people, and in my own personal experience, once it turns sour, it's sour.
Yeah, and this is an area where I find the church hasn't been too helpful, because the common practice, the current practice, is that, you're supposed to stay married forever. And it wasn't always like that. I'm in the Orthodox tradition, and in the Orthodox tradition, you're allowed to get married up to 3 times. And the reason we say that is because sometimes things happen. And we have a tendency to put words into God's mouth. And my experience has been, it's never God's will to be in a loveless relationship. It's never God's will to be in an abusive relationship. Right. It's God's will for us to be happy and healthy and whole. Now, that's been my experience. But when we're working on an operating system, that, it's like you go from Windows over to Google.
Right.
And as long as I'm on a Windows machine, I'm okay. But if I'm on a Google machine and I'm trying to run Windows, but I don't have the right upgrade, doesn't matter how good I am at Windows, it's not going to do what I need for it to do. So if I'm hearing you correctly, what happens is we have to go in for new software. And so we can have a paradigm, a change, life change, so that we have the right operating system for the right relationship. Would that be correct?
Well, and if I don't update it, then I'm more than likely going to just repeat the same thing that just happened, right?
You get a virus.
Exactly. So if, updates are necessary. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to go to therapy to get updated. It just means that I got to really take a look at what worked and what didn't work, and why didn't it work, and what needs to change, so that I don't repeat it and do it again. Mm-hmm. Right. And also, it's not all me. It's not all of the other person. It takes 2 to tango.
Right.
Okay. Right. So we both contributed to the milk turning sour. Neither one particularly is completely to blame for the milk turning sour, regardless of what turned it sour, right?
Yes.
So it's a two-way street. But once it does turn sour, the likelihood of it unsouring itself is pretty unlikely. That's just, I hate to be gloom and doom, but it just, once it gets that far along, then it's sometimes too late to do anything about it. If you can catch it before it gets there,
right,
now there's an opportunity to do something to maybe change the course.
Exactly. And excuse me, it all comes back to, if I'm hearing you correctly, I have to find out what my wiring is, mm-hmm. instead of trying to fix the other person's wiring. Yeah. But to also find out if we are compatible systems.
Right.
And we used to say in the early days, back in the day, everyone's responsible, no one's to blame. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in who's to blame for this relationship not working out, instead of realizing, we're all responsible.
Right.
Sometimes we have to get healthy enough to get out of a bad situation. And that's why I say sometimes the church hasn't been the most helpful. Mm-hmm. There have been times I've worked with couples where I thought, wow, this has been successful, because they realize they're not good for each other. They are just going to hurt each other over and over again.
Right.
And, as I've said with some, I said, how can either one of you find the person that you're supposed to be with if you won't let go of the person you're not supposed to be?
Wow, that's very true. Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard to do. Now, this show isn't about telling people to break up with whoever they're with. It's about being real.
Right.
And sometimes some relationships are not made in heaven. And, two sickies don't make a wellie.
Right.
And as they say, two ding-dongs don't make a
Well,
bell.
and we kind of opened the show with this whole idea about the whole COVID thing and people, having to be stuck together, if you will, at home
Yeah.
for long periods of time, and the stress of that. Maybe you've had someone who's unemployed. Maybe there have been financial difficulties. If you've got children, small children, or kids that had to be at home, they had to homeschool, or you had young kids and you couldn't take them to childcare. People working from home. This has put such a strain on even healthy families.
Yes, it has.
I mean, significant strain. So, I can't imagine what's going to happen as things start to open up. And, I think that we're just going to see a flood of people seeking treatment for, all kinds of problems, depression, anxiety. But, the toll it's taken on couples, I think it's going to really be, we're going to see, divorces and breakups galore.
And part of that's on an economical basis because money does matter in relationships. When both people are really stressed out about money, or one's trying to protect the other one, not let them know we're in so much trouble financially, just keep it to myself. Well, the one person winds up resenting that they're not given any information, and it adds to their fear because they don't know where things stand. And the person keeping the information gets resentful because look at my martyrism, everything I'm doing to protect you, and you can't be grateful.
Right.
Instead, you question my methods.
Yeah.
And, Zig Ziglar once said, money may not be the most important thing in life, but next to breathing is a close second. And now that may sound really materialistic, but I'll tell you what, when my bills are paid and I have a nice meal on the table, I feel pretty good.
Right.
When my bills aren't paid and I'm eating crackers and peanut butter because I can't afford anything else, it's very hard to feel good.
Right.
And so it does matter. And I think we need to get over, you talked about earlier about these fairy tales and Disney and everything. I think we need to get real and say, look, finances has a lot to do with relationships. And if you can't talk about the finances, there's a lot more you can't talk about.
Right.
Which means, again, you're both left alone.
Right.
And you're in a relationship where you're both keeping secrets, trying to protect each other, and you both resent each other for the secrets.
Right.
So
I agree. And it happens.
and COVID's brought it out a lot.
Oh, yeah. Because all of the things that would normally stress out a couple have all kind of, it's been one perfect storm. All of these things have converged at the same time in a big way, and so one thing would be enough, but when they all converge at the same time, it's just an overwhelming tidal wave of stuff that's happening, and even healthy couples are having a problem coping and getting through this together. And so I'm sure for some they'll say, oh, it made us stronger,
Some it may.
and I hope that's the case. But yet on others they're going to say, well, we were doing okay until COVID happened, and then this really was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Well, COVID's forced me to try to get healthier, to double down on my meditation, double down on the things that are good mental health for me, because there was so much societal change. It's real easy to put these things aside and say, I have to work on putting this fire out first. And what I find is I have to do the meditation first. Otherwise, what I think is water I'm throwing on the fire is really gasoline.
Right.
I have to take time to read the label on the can. And if I don't do the things that are healthy for me, then it reduces the health in the relationship. It reduces the health of just getting through life.
Right.
Because this is the toughest time most of us have ever gone through.
Oh, I can easily say that I don't recall ever going through something. I mean, think about it. Usually, most of us, if we were somewhat healthy, we had some sort of outlet. You know, maybe it was going to the gym, maybe it was hanging out with your friends, or maybe it was playing golf, or maybe it was, you know, just going out to dinner or doing things like that we've really not been able to do. And because we haven't been able to do it, it's basically I'm sitting there looking at you and you're looking at me, and we don't have any outlet other than each other. And if I'm not able to be there for you and you're not able to be there for me, then where are we going to put all this? Where are we going to take all this energy? The negative energy, we're going to put it on each other.
And that's where it comes back to how we start a show, which crisis time is awakening time. We have to
Right.
find new answers to old situations. And nobody's bad here.
Right.
Nobody's bad here. But we have found out through the crisis time that we have to have new answers, because everything has changed in life, and we've changed in life.
Everything, yeah.
And people I've known for years, I see the change in them. They see the change in me. They see the change in me before I do. And sometimes it's helpful just to find out, okay, what are the changes? Who are we now?
Right.
Now we're getting to this side of this pandemic. And right now, again, we're going through more because today's politics is tearing relationships apart left and right.
Yeah.
No pun intended. And because everyone's so busy being right. And we have to get out of who's right and get into what's right. And for that to happen means we have to find a new answers to this whole situation.
Right. And you know, in all fairness, people don't necessarily have anybody telling them what other, you know, giving them other options, giving them other answers, or giving them the answers. You know, it's like it's all up to you. Well, if I don't know something, how can I know it?
Exactly.
So I can't just come up with those answers all by myself.
Exactly.
I may need someone to help guide me to some different options and different answers.
And that's the whole idea of a counselor, is helping you to see what you're not able to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. Not being able to see these things has nothing to do with intelligence.
Oh, no.
It has to do with being too close to things. You know, we talked recently about, you know, getting caught in other people's web. And how does the fly get caught? Most of the time they don't see the web until they're already in it.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID has been a big web that people didn't see coming, and they're caught in it, and all they see is a big spider, and they don't know, how am I going to survive this?
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I don't know if a lot of our listeners know psychology, but there's a famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow.
Yes.
And he had a pyramid called the hierarchy of needs, okay? And basically he says your basic needs like food and shelter and safety have to be met before you can meet your higher needs, which ultimately the highest need is what he called self-actualization. But, you know, we can't be working on these higher things, even relationships, when our security and safety is threatened, when we're maybe concerned about food, shelter, you know, money. We'll throw money in there just because it provides those things in our culture. So as long as our basic needs are threatened, we can't be working on these higher things. That's just basic Maslow psychology.
Well, speaking of Maslow's psychology, Frank is looking at me through the window saying we're down to our last minute. And, you know, I want to thank you for coming on the show again.
Thanks
because
again.
I thought this was an important thing to cover, because I think a lot of people are experiencing the crisis in life right now. It's affecting relationships. And so that they know that there is hope. There are things you can do. And sometimes the hope is just getting well enough to say, okay, this isn't working, or the hope is saying, here's a way that it might.
Yeah.
But knowing when the milk is sour and when it's not sour
Yeah.
is very helpful. And so,
Well, thank
folks,
you again.
so folks, you've been listening to Viewpoint with Father John. My guest this evening has been Dr. John Smith, who is a psychotherapist and a professor, and is also the author of the book, The Authentic Man: A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. And if no one this week told you they loved you, let me be the first. And thank you for tuning in each week. And we'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. God bless.